Hello, everyone, and welcome to Encounter Church. My name is Sam. I'm the hospitality director here, and I just want to welcome you to our digital worship experience. This is something we put together every weekend so you can encounter God wherever you are. We'll begin shortly with a message from the scriptures, followed by worship. So we encourage you to stick around after the sermon to join us in worship. But for now, let's listen to this week's message.
This past week, I came across two different stories on Twitter. The first one was an article from the New York Times somebody shared, and it was called "The Pandemic Shrank Our Social Circles. Let's Keep It That Way." And then I think in response to that, somebody reshared an article from January from The Atlantic that said, "The pandemic has erased entire categories of friendship." And both articles are kind of looking at the same issue. And that issue is, how has the pandemic affected our friendships? But particularly our more casual friendships, not the people that you're like super close with that you've known for years, but maybe, co-workers or, parents of other kids in school, or people that you play in some sort of rec league with, stuff like that, right? Like people that are not super close, but people that you hang out with sometimes, people that you might invite over to a party, people that you might grab a drink with, stuff like that. And the gist of both articles is that because of COVID, because of the lockdowns, like all of the environments in which we connected with these people, they're gone. So there's people that we maybe, don't see as often, and we've kind of like lost touch with, and those relationships have fizzled out. And, the funny thing is that the articles came to opposite conclusions. Like the New York Times article was advocating for, hey, listen, like you don't feel like when you start socializing more regularly again that you have to reconnect with those people. Why don't you just take that time and invest it in the real important, meaningful friendships in your life? And the Atlantic article actually came to the opposite conclusion. They said that, listen, there's a lot of, sociological evidence that those relationships play a role in our lives that's important and valuable. And that, as a healthy, well-rounded person, you should continue to keep those relationships. And when you start socializing again, consider that and maybe think about rekindling some of those friendships. And there was a quote in that article from the Atlantic that really stuck out to me. It said, during the past year, it's often felt like the pandemic has come for all but the closest of my close ties. Which honestly, it rings true to me. Because I remember when the lockdown started, it was around the same weekend that, we found out that Megan was pregnant, and that, we're expecting Jack. And the whole half of the lockdown was basically as waiting for Jack, and we didn't see anybody. Partially, we're trying to be cautious. We didn't want to expose Megan, so we didn't see people for weeks. It was just the two of us, and a lot of relationships that we had. Like at the beginning, people were like having board games on Zoom and happy hours on Zoom, all that sort of thing. And very slowly, we kind of like got tired of that. And there were people that I honestly fell out of touch with. This just yesterday, I saw a friend for the first time in months. I hadn't even like reached out to via text, and he was just walking around the neighborhood and stopped by to see if I was home, and we connected for a couple minutes outside. And maybe that's been the case for you. Maybe you've had people that, hey, like, yeah, I remember like my buddy I haven't seen a while. And I'm bringing this up, and I'm telling you this because both of these articles look at an idea that I want to explore today for a few minutes, and that's what's the role and the importance of community in our lives. We're in the middle of this series that we're calling Selfless, and we're basically looking at 4 postures that we think help us be oriented towards God and towards others. And for us, that's at the core of living a faith that stays faithful to Jesus in the midst of a time where so many of Christian beliefs are being contested, but at the same time a faith that remains inviting and welcoming and compelling to others. And we looked at the 2 postures that are God oriented, that were faithfulness and obedience. And the next 2 weeks we're going to look at the postures of community and hospitality, which are postures about how we relate with other people. And today I want to focus on the posture of community. And what I mean by the posture of community is this: it is a posture that's open to relationship and communion with others beyond our immediate family circle. Which is important because if you consider these 2 articles, a lot of us have kind of like just gotten down to that. And many of us have very little contact and very little relationship with other people. And what we see in the scriptures as a community, particularly within the church, particularly within the family of God, plays a very important role. And before I get into what that looks like, I want to just talk to you for a couple of minutes about why I think that's important. Now, remember the idea. Part of how this series started was looking at the last few years and how people within the Christian faith seem to have completely abandoned the ethics and the tenets of Christianity and embrace all sorts of crazy ideologies and conspiracy theories. And it's like thinking like, how did that happen? And also at the same time, what I mentioned earlier, that, how do we live a faith that doesn't do that? A faith that, remains faithful and committed to Jesus and his teachings, but at the same time, that's still a faith that's welcoming and inviting and compelling to people that are not Christians to consider the claims of Christianity. And I think that the posture of community plays an important role answering both of those questions. A few months ago, I was listening to this podcast called Rabbit Hole. I don't know if you heard it when it came out. It's from the New York Times, and it's basically a podcast looking at conspiracy theories about how YouTube algorithms and Facebook algorithms were key in getting people down the rabbit hole involved in stuff like QAnon. And one of the things I learned during listening to that podcast that I found very interesting was the role that community played in that. Because the arc of a couple of the characters in this podcast were people that, for one reason or another, didn't really have a strong community or connection and kind of like turned to the internet for that and started watching YouTube videos, and like some people resonated with them, so kept watching, and the algorithm just kind of like starts spewing stuff out to them, and before you know it, they're like deep into stuff like QAnon. And towards the later episodes in the podcast, it's crazy because for some of the people in QAnon, that was their community. Like they would talk, wake up and log online and talk to them and check in and see what was the new drop that Q had, like all sorts of stuff like that. It was crazy. And that is an extreme example of tribalism. Now, you've probably heard this word before, but we want to use it in a particular context. A few weeks ago, I was listening to a talk from John Mark Comer. You've heard me mention him before. He's a pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland. And he was looking at all this phenomenon of this type of groups of people, like banding together for conspiracy theories, stuff like that. And he called it tribalism. And he actually thinks that tribalism helps explain a lot of the extreme polarization that we have in society, a lot of the infighting and the demonization of the other that we see in social media. And he says that tribalism is what happens when our hyper-individualism in society collides with the digital age. That or hyper-individualism has made us self-centered, and we've talked about that before. That's kind of like one of the core reasons of why we find ourselves in this space right now. But self-centeredness also means that we become isolated, because if we're honest, it's really hard to love others when you're self-centered, right? And what technology has done, though, is that it gives us access to other people who are like-minded. So we come together, but we don't come together for the sake of each other or because we like each other or because we want to hang out. We come together so that we can gang up on other people and we can attack other people. That's tribalism. And John Mark Comer, in his talk, used an interesting term. He says that tribalism is a form of anti-community. And here's how he described it. It's a form of anti-community because it's based not on mutual love, but mutual hate. Not on what you're for, but what you're against. If you've ever, maybe you've posted something on Facebook, or maybe you've seen somebody that post something on Facebook that had like even a hint of some sort of like political inclination, and you've seen somebody comment something attacking that, and then you see somebody else comment something attacking that, and before you have like 50 notifications of people just like yelling at each other on your mentions. That's tribalism in action. And the thing is that when it comes to understanding how some Christians were seduced by conspiracy theories, I think that this has a role to play. And the question and the kind of like realization that I've had is that if people don't have true community, they're going to settle for lower forms of community, including tribalism. The other aspect where community is important is that I actually think that it's a key piece on how Christianity can be inviting and compelling for those outside of the faith. Now, if you remember, the series is not only about figuring out where things went wrong, but also how we can practice and maintain our faith, that remains faithful to Jesus, but it's also inviting and compelling to others. And I think that community is crucial to accomplish that. Number one, because we live in a society that has become lonelier and lonelier and more isolated. During the 2018 census, the census found out that 28% of households in America are what you call single person. That means there's only one person in the household. That means that there's 35.7 million people in America who live alone. Add to that all the detrimental effects that the lockdowns from COVID have had in our relationships. And like the two articles I mentioned at the top are an example of that. In the talk that I heard from John Mark Comer, he mentioned an interesting number. He said that in the last few years, the average American has gone from 3.2 friends to 1.8 friends. If you worked up to a person asking how many friends they have, like if you average that out, average person in America would say they have about 3.2 friends. If you do the division, right? And now that number is 1.8. And all this is to say that people need community. Now, the second reason why community is important in our quest of following Jesus in a selfless way is because community is a place where we learn to love. If we are called to live lives of love towards others and avoid from seeing the other as our enemy, particularly people that don't believe like us or don't look like us or don't think like us, we're going to have to be rooted in community. If Jesus calls us to love, well, you can only love when you're in relationship with people. And both the ground where we practice that, but also the ground where we learn to do that is community. Now, how does that happen? When I read you a passage from the book of Acts, it's Acts chapter 2. And to give you a little bit of background, this is the beginning of the church in the world. Like this is the origins of the church. You've heard me talk about this before. The book of Acts begins with Jesus ascending into heaven and basically telling his disciples that he's going to send the Holy Spirit to empower them. They lock themselves up in a room and pray until the Holy Spirit shows up. The Holy Spirit shows up. The apostle Peter gets up and preaches, and like 3,000 people become Christians like in an instant and get baptized. And at the end of that tale, that story, there's like this little coda that Luke writes, telling you kind of like what the early church looked like. And this is what it says. This is Acts chapter 2, and I'm going to start reading on verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I want to show you a couple of characteristics of what community looked like in the early church that I think can apply to what community ought to look like for us today, what it looks like to live with a posture towards community. The first thing is this: it was a priority for them. How does that verse start? It says, they devoted themselves. Community wasn't something that they saw as this optional side thing that maybe they got to do. No, for them, community was like a critical part of their faith. And I would argue that that's very different to how we see community now. And this is not something that I say to criticize you or to make anybody feel guilty. But if we're honest, a lot of us see community as an optional thing. If it fits in our busy schedules, we'll try to make something. And not all of that is your fault. We live in a world that's very, very busy. A lot of us, particularly in the city, live very, very hectic lives. But if this is true, if community is something that we should devote ourselves to, community, he puts it at the same level as being devoted to the apostles' teaching, at the same level as praying, then we need to make space for it. We need to see it as a spiritual discipline, the same way that we make sure that we are reading the scriptures, in the same way that we make sure that we're praying, we have to see community as something that we have to make a priority for. I would say that another issue, though, is that in the city in particular, our lives are very transient, right? Like a lot of us were here for a year, we're here for a couple of years, and it's almost like we know that we're going to move, and it becomes harder to commit. It becomes harder to like invest ourselves in people, and a lot of us, we see community as kind of like this interchangeable thing. Like we move somewhere, we'll find our church, we'll find our community, versus being committed to the people that we're living in community with right now. I don't know if you ever watched the show Parks and Rec. Used to love the show, and there's a scene in the show. There's two characters, and one of the characters is like this woman with like a heart of gold, Leslie Knope. She's like the main character, and she's dating this lawyer guy who's very sociable, very popular. Like he's like the heart of the party, but he's also sometimes a little bit of a jerk. And there's this scene towards the end of the episode where she's talking to kind of like her mentor, a guy named Ron Swanson, and she's saying like, listen, he's a great guy, but he was a jerk, and I don't know why. There's something about him that I don't like. And Ron Swanson, in his wisdom, he says this about him. He says, he's a tourist. He vacations on people's lives, takes pictures, puts them in a scrapbook, and moves on. All he's interested in are stories. Basically, Leslie, he's selfish, and you're not. And that's why you don't like him. And I think that a lot of us think about community in that way. And there's something King way he says, he says he's selfish and you're not. He says like a lot of us are on community for what we can get out of it. We see community as something for us, for our sake. But the thing about Christian community is that Christian community is not just for our sake, it's for the sake of others as well, which takes me to the next point. It was a community that was for the sake of each other. If you go to like verses 44 and 45 of that passage in Acts, well, he's describing the life that they have. That they were together, they had everything in common, they saw possessions to give to anyone who had need. Well, what's going on there? He's getting at the fact that they weren't in community for their own interests. They weren't in community just because they were lonely, or just because they wanted to make friends, or just because they wanted to find somebody to date. They were in community because they believed that they could help each other. This is a difference between the community in the book of Acts and anti-communities like QAnon, that, their organizing factor wasn't owning the libs. Their organizing factor wasn't taking a stand for some ideology. Their organizing factor was following Jesus together. And the result of that was that they would love one another, A lot of times we try to engage community, but we try to engage community through the lens of what can I get out of that. We try to engage community because I want to meet people. We try to make community because I want to have friends. We try to make community because I want to find somebody to date sometimes. And I'm not saying that it's bad to want to have friends, and I'm not saying that it's bad to want to find somebody to date. But what I'm saying is that the type of community that the book of Acts speaks about, and the type of community that I believe Jesus calls his followers into, is a community that's more mature than that looks beyond that. It's a community that really understands, I'm part of this community because I have something to contribute here, because I'm needed here, and also because I need these people in my life. Because that's the thing, it's not like we don't get anything out of community. If anything, I would argue that this passage shows us particularly how members of the community were cared for, right? But the real goal of the community was no more self-actualization. It wasn't to have a better social life. If anything, it was the opposite of that, right? Like, what's the goal of this community is actually to make us selfless. And the way in which community helps us in that way is because when you are in a relationship with other people, in a real relationship where you're open, when you're loving people, when people are seeing who you really are, and when you're seeing who other people are, well, guess what's happened? There's going to be some disagreements. And there's going to be moments where some of your flaws that nobody else knows about, well, they're going to start becoming evident to the people that you're in community with, right? A lot of times, part of the problem in our own lives, in our own maturity, is that we're not even aware of some of our flaws because nobody sees them. When I started dating Megan, like before I started dating Megan, I would never have thought that I was a self-centered person. I thought I'm a Christian. I was already a pastor at that point. I was like, I'm a good guy. And one of the things that happened when I started dating Megan is that I would make plans or I would do things and I would not tell her at all. And she would find out at the last minute. She would find out, like, as I was, uh, on my way to something, and she would ask me, "Hey, where you at?" And but what happened there was, like, I had never thought about anybody but myself when I was making decisions about my life. And all of a sudden, I'm like dating this person, realizing, okay, no. I have to make room for her, and I have to make decisions that include both of us. Now, that process of kind of like having like or flaws or sins sometimes, honestly, exposed, it's not fun. Like, we don't want to. Community is not necessarily like a place where we're always exposed to constant criticism. But it's not like that how it works. The way it works is that in those space of community, well, God, that's what God uses us to show us the things that need to change, and that's what God uses to change us. There's this passage in the book of Galatians that says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. You see, the key part about community, particularly Christian community, is that it happens in the context of love. So we're learning to love one another. We say things, we call things out, we encourage people. All of that happens primarily in the context of love. And when that works, it's an incredibly beautiful thing, because it's not meant to bring us down. It's meant to build us up. But getting to a point takes time, and takes hard work, and takes grace. But this is a space where we're going to learn to love. There's another aspect to life in community I think it's important. That's that the burden of life becomes lighter. Those verses again, 44 and 45. What are they doing? Like, it's just that they nobody had any need. They had everything in common. If somebody had a need, somebody would go and sell a possession so that they could take care of the person. What's going on? They're taking care of each other. There's this mutual dynamic at work in that passage that people didn't join the community just to give or just to receive, but they all understood that, it was both things here, that as they gave, that other people could receive. It's this virtuous cycle of giving and receiving that took care of one another. We carry each other's burdens, what the passage in Galatians says. There's an Irish proverb that I like a lot that says, it is in the shelter of each other that the people live. And I've thought about that a lot lately, because we live in a time that a lot of us have gone through a lot of different struggles, haven't we? Maybe it's struggles about mental health, maybe it's financial struggles. And chances are that because we're not engaging in community as much as we are, that there is a lot of things that we're keeping to ourselves. It's hard saying over Zoom, I'm struggling with depression right now. It's hard. You're just saying on a text message how we feel. And there's so much that each of us are carrying alone. And what you see in the book of Acts is, no. Actually, like, communities, how we carry each other's burdens, and they're talking about economic burdens, but I think it applies to all of our burdens. That the part of what happens is that we carry each other together. I don't know if you've ever read The Lord of the Rings or watched movies, but towards the end of the last movie, like the main character Frodo, he's taking this ring that's evil to destroy it in this volcano, and towards the end of the movie, he comes to a point that he just can't take it, like the weight of the ring, because it was an evil ring, so it has like all this darkness to it. Like, he can't take it and he can't get there. And Samwise Gamgee, who's like his best friend, Frodo's best friend, he's walking with him. He's with him, and he says, like, I want to help you. And he says, like, you can't carry this burden. It's my burden to carry. And he says one of probably the coolest lines of the book. He says, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. carry each other's burdens. So many people right now in the world are living lives of isolation. And the answer to that is community. It's in the shelter of each other that we live. And what I'm telling you is that in the world in which we live right now, where people are struggling with the idea of community, the church, and your part of the church, could be the place where people can find true community, where they're loved, where they're cared for. But that's going to take us to engage in this posture. That's going to take us to make community a priority. And it's going to take for us to be open to love and learn how to love one another, even if that sometimes exposes our flaws and the things that we need to change in our lives, and being willing to engage in that. And it also going to take that we learn to carry each other's burden, that we let some people carry our burdens, so we share, that we're open, but also then that we are willing to receive that from others, that we're willing to care for others, that we're willing to listen to others and to help them along the journey. And I wonder if in today's world that could make a world of difference. So as we look at the next few months, why don't we lean into this? Why don't we live lives with a posture of community as a church that welcomes other people, that invites other people in your own life? That to actually try to engage others, try to as it becomes safer and as we get vaccinated, of spending time in the presence of others, of engaging us, of caring for others, of carrying each other's burdens. And that just might be what people need right now. Grace and peace.
Hello again. We hope that this message was a blessing to you and is helpful on your faith journey. If this is your first time joining us, or maybe you've joined us for a few times before and are looking to get involved further, we would love to connect with you. We have a digital connection card. You can go to encounterdc.com/connect. For every connection card we receive, we set aside some money to do some good in our community. We also have a special gift for you for filling out a card. You can share as much or as little information as you like, ask us any questions, and find out how you can get involved in the life of the church. I also want to thank everyone who supports Encounter through your generosity. Your giving allows us to do everything we do, from serving our community to creating content like this. If you'd like to give, you can go to encounterdc.com/give. You can make a one-time gift, or you can set up recurring giving. And now we encourage you to join us for worship. We invite you to listen, sing along, or use this time to just sit and reflect. Our hope is that you can experience God's presence during this time. So if you will, please join us in worship.
Sing, I count on one thing. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. And yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Yes, I will. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. He won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. And yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh, yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will, and I choose to pray. your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will. Sing, He is jealous. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of His wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how He loves us so. Oh, how He loves us. How He loves us so. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of His wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how He loves us so. Oh, how He loves us. How He loves us so. Father, we thank you that every good and perfect gift comes from you. That you love us so much. That you just want to pour out good things on us. And I know that this season in our lives has even made me doubt. God, I just pray right now that as we sing together in our homes, Father, that we know that we are not alone because you have declared that you love us. And we love you. So, Father, accept this praise, God. May it be pleasing to your ears. Let's all come together and sing about His love for us. Come on, let's go. Oh, yeah, He loves us. Oh, how He loves us. Oh, how He loves us. Oh, how He loves. Yeah, He loves us. Oh, how He loves us. Oh, His portion, and He is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in His eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. So heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest. And I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way He loves us. Oh, how He loves us. Oh, how He loves us. Oh, how He loves. Yeah, He loves us. Oh, how He loves us. that one more time. He loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us.